Hi, this is Mrs. Dahman. Today we're going to look at a third element in fictional text that helps us understand and build a story and comprehension of the story within fictional text. Previously, we looked at comparing characters within the story and comparing settings. And today we're going to look at how describing events builds the entire scene and how the three combined build the entire scene to help you understand what the author's message or the author's purpose is, as well as helping you understand the entire meaning or purpose of the story itself. So we're going to look at the worksheet called Describe Events. The events of a story are the things that happen. The things that take place in the story, the things that take place in our own lives, those are the events that tell the story, that create the story. Events often lead up to problems and solutions. And as we all know, when we're looking at fictional text, many times the purpose of the text is to identify a problem and establish a solution, and what message or lesson we can learn from the problem that took place and the solution that was presented. How to compare the events. A character's actions and words lead up to the events. So basically what they're saying is what the characters do, what occurs in the story, is what leads up to the events that take place. Find the spot in the text where a problem or a major event occurs. Identify important events leading up to the problem and again after the problem. How are the events similar? How are they different? We're going to look at another excerpt from Cinderella, and this time it'll be a little bit different. They'll refer briefly back to the story that we read on the first day, but they're also designed to work independently. And so we're going to focus on these sections of the text today as we describe the events using a Venn diagram. Now, of course, you're welcome to do this independently if you feel confident of your skills, but if you're just reviewing this, because remember, this is just revisiting. These are things you've learned in the past. If you're wanting to review it with me, we will talk through it and go over it and determine together what we need to include. All right, here's the excerpt from Cinderella. The prince led her to the dais The prince led her to the dais where sat the king and queen. She made a deep reverence before them, a slighter but no less gracious one to the company, and withdrew. Although she had given no orders, her coach stood waiting for her. Slipping in, she was whisked home in the time it would take you to wink an eye. So basically what they're saying is after meeting the king and queen up on their stage or their dais, Cinderella made a deep reverence. That's basically saying she bowed to them and let them know that she had respect for them. And then another bow, but without, maybe not quite as deep, but still with complete respect to the other people that were up there with the king and the queen. And then she left. She went to her coach and she got inside of it and she went home, which is a little bit different than the story of her racing out when the clock struck midnight, but it's the same idea. An action that she took caused an event in the story. All right, the second section. Excuse me. With the last stroke of 12, coach and footman had whisked away, and poor Cinderella, barefoot now as well as in rags, panted homeward over roads where the flints cut her until she bled, and the owls and great moths splendoured out of the bushes against her face. To make matters worse, a thunderstorm broke before she had run half the distance, and she arrived home in a terrible plight, muddy, drenched to the skin, and almost more dead than alive. In one thing only she was fortunate. She had outstripped her sisters, whose coach on the way home lost a wheel, and I have a suspicion that Cinderella's godmother had something to do with this misadventure too. All right, again, kind of convoluted way to say that she had all kinds of issues when she was heading back home. Let's see. Let's go back and look at it and think about it. So all of her coachmen and footmen and even her coach disappeared at the stroke of midnight. So Cinderella, rather than riding in this grand carriage, was having to run home. But now she had no shoes because remember she lost one of her glass slippers. And so she had to take off the other one. So she was dressed in the rags that she normally wear. It was raining and icky outside, and she ran over roads where the flints cut her until she bled. So basically that means there's rocks and stones in the road that caused her feet to get cut and bleed. Critters in the night, owls and moths, were flying around in the bushes, and they ran into her. And she arrived home wet, dirty, and tired, worn out because of the long distance. And then she's saying that she did get home before she had outstripped her sisters, which means she got home before the stepsisters. So they didn't see her in her state of disarray, I suppose. And the author indicates that Cinderella's godmother had something to do with the wheel trouble that the stepsisters had. So with a Venn diagram, we compare and contrast, right? And we look at how they're separate and how they're the same or similar. In event 1, she was still in her fancy dress, and she walked up to the king and queen and she bowed. And then she gave another bow to the company with the king and queen, and then she left. She got to her coach and she went inside. So she was inside in a coach and was whisked away. So the coach, she had a coach in event 2 and a coach in event 1. So that might be something that we go in here in the middle section, because she rode in a coach both. Now her coach went away here and she had it completely here, but a coach belongs to both events or both scenes. It's a part of the scene. All right. And then the changes, right? She was still in a fancy gown. She was at a fancy ball. But now in event 2, she's out in a storm. She's wearing rags. She's not wearing her fancy clothes anymore. She doesn't have the people taking care of her like she did in the first event. And she's pretty much miserable. Here she was having fun. Here she was miserable. Here she was dressed fancy. Here she was dressed poorly. Here she was in a comfortable carriage, and here her comfortable carriage had gone away. So you can see they're very, very different events, but they both had in common the fairy godmother played a role and the carriage played a role. And of course, throughout the whole story, the stepsisters play a role, though they aren't mentioned in event 1, even though we know they are at the ball. So that's how you can compare and contrast different events. And you can see with these, we have one picture in our head of event 1 versus a completely different picture in our head of event 2. But they're both important to understanding the complete story. Thank you for joining me today, and I hope combining these 3 elements, the setting, the characters, and the events in a story, and being able to compare and contrast them helps you fully understand. We're going to combine all of those in the next few days, but it helps you understand the entirety of a story and all of the different pieces that you can take from a story.